This morning on this very radio station, the Sports Junkies had Mayor Muriel Bowser of Washington, D.C. on to discuss what you'd expect her to discuss. The fact that the Commanders eventually, as soon as humanly possible, are going to need a new stadium, and she is over one of the three jurisdictions that could grant them land to do just that. There are a million questions when it comes to this stadium. Who's going to pay for it? Where is it going to be? Who gets a say in such things? Is this something that the federal government is involved in, especially in D.C.? Is this something that taxpayers are voting on the financial side of it? Or is it something like in Virginia? I think there are mechanisms to just do it and not even ask taxpayers if this is the thing that they want, other than the fact that obviously whatever politicians do gets them voted either back in office or not. And that is an issue that some voters might consider. So there is a lot of factors here. The spiritual home of the team, if you will, in RFK. And Mayor Bowser touched directly or indirectly on a lot of it. Bottom line for her, though, she thinks that RFK, where the stadium was for decades and decades and decades through the glory days, is the best spot for the Washington Commanders to be.
This is how we start. We want our team, but we also know we have a great site, and we believe we have the best site. Best served by transportation, best served by public transportation. And I think the lure of history is something that counts. And I don't know what dollar amount I put on it, but it counts. Mm-hmm. In my experience with people who have built great businesses, especially in taking over a team that needed to be rescued, they care about that. And they care about the legacy that they leave on sport and in an area.
So that question, to even add more context, the question she was answering was one from, I believe, Jason, it might have been EB, about the fact that DC is very unlikely, this is my words, not hers or his, but DC is very unlikely to be able to offer the same kind of public money that Virginia will. Obviously, there's a leaked prospectus from Seth Wickersham at ESPN a couple of months ago at this point that the Harris Group thought they might be able to get as much as $1 billion in public funding in one way or another. And there's no way in hell that's happening in D.C. I don't even know if directly for the stadium, D.C. will give a dime. What D.C. very likely would do is invest in the infrastructure around the stadium and obviously a lot of other things around the stadium, even if they leave the stadium itself to Josh Harris and anyone else in his ownership group that is going to fund it. The NFL does have money that they give from a certain fund for owners to build stadiums. So there are ways to get the financing done, even for a guy who just spent $6.05 billion along with his partners on this football team. But I do think when you talk about the calculation, the sheer numbers, Mayor Bowser brings up a very good point, which is the money up front is only part of this. There is something to be said for being at the spiritual home of the team, being at a place where fans enjoy going and going in and out. And another answer that we won't play for you, of course, you can hear the whole interview by rewinding in the free Odyssey app or checking out on the Junkies podcast page, the interview. It is posted not only when it aired in the hour, but as a separate interview. So very easy to find. Even if you just search Mayor Bowser in your podcast app, you can find the full interview. I know because that's how I listen to it. But she says, like, fans anecdotally don't want to go to these suburban stadiums. They don't want to go and have to drive a long way and then sit in a parking lot because there's nothing else to do, and that's where they tailgate. Like, obviously, some fans want to do that, but a lot don't, and then you're just kind of stuck there. They'd much rather go to these urban type of stadiums where there's things to do. For instance, tonight, if you're coming down to Navy Yard and want to go to the Spirit game at Audi Field, or you go to a DC United game or a DC Defenders game there, or a Nats game in Navy Yard, obviously, like, you can go to dinner at any number of restaurants, go to the game, you can go out afterwards, and you are all in the same area, as opposed to, hey, our entire day is spent going to and from this suburban stadium that is merely surrounded by asphalt and parking lots. And I think that is a compelling case. And for a franchise and an ownership group that has prioritized fan experience, that is something to consider. Again, is it enough to make up $1 billion funding deficit? Hell no. Hell no. But it is worth some amount of money in the long term for sure. There was a question about whether or not RFK is a big enough site. It is a massive, massive area, but is it big enough for the footprint of not just the football stadium, but all the other things that they want to do around it? Here was Mayor Bowser.
Of course it is. It's 190 acres. Anybody's been on the site, they're not going to double the size of the current stadium because we have to remember a football team played there. Our football team played there for many years. Mm-hmm. And you won't need to, unlike a lot of the suburban sites that aren't served by public transportation or sitting right on the highway exchange, you don't need to build all that parking. And that's how you get a real urban feeling stadium, which is what people want. People don't want to go out to campus with miles and miles of parking after they sit on the highway for an hour and a half to get there. So they want to get to the game, enjoy the game, and have the feel of being in a great urban stadium. They can look out and see the capital of the United States. They'll look the other way and see the Anacostia River. But having said all that, that's going to be true for the $60 million local sportsplex that we build for DC that's already funded. That's going to be true for people who come down to the campus just to have better access to the Anacostia River and have restaurants and dining and entertainment. So we think that the site has it all.
That's a 5-point penalty, 5-point fine for me because I didn't think that the hey, they want urban stadiums part was in that bite. And I said that you weren't going to hear it. But there you go. I told you. She said it. There you go. And I agree. Like that site has enough room for everything. But there are other factors here. And, 10 game days a year, plus all the other events, what happens in the neighborhood? Is there enough to justify, enough good things besides the stadium to justify the amount of traffic that will come into a neighborhood for the residents that already live in that area? Nevertheless, the new ones that would live if you built new housing near RFK, if you revitalize the stadium at that site. What else is happening, obviously, at RFK and at the surrounding areas besides the football games? And that is something that Bowser and her team have certainly thought of.
I don't know that the Philadelphia model is what we want. Okay. Keep in mind, Josh is involved in Philadelphia right now, and he's trying to move the stadium to downtown Philadelphia. I mean, I just don't think that's the movement for a lot of places. We don't want a lot of asphalt parking and only one use. We want vibrancy, and we think that comes when you have the campus brought to life on days where there isn't a game. So having a multiple use is a high priority for us. Now, Poplar Point is just across the river, and we are continuing to work with our partners at Park Service to get that kind of free and clear. Now, I don't know that that's the best place for a football stadium, but we do think that it could accommodate more sport and recreational use.
So that was one of the big newsworthy things this morning. She says Poplar Point, not the best place for a football stadium. And the Philadelphia model, for those that are unfamiliar, actually, I mean, as someone who's gone to games there, covering them, like, I love it, but I'm coming in from out of town. My wife is from Philadelphia. She generally thinks people really, really like that model specific to Philadelphia. But there is, like, the thing about the Philadelphia model that works is the location. The idea of 3 stadiums in one area right off the highway with public transportation doesn't have to be the Philadelphia model of 3 stadiums and thus a ton of parking. The part of the Philadelphia model that I think people love is the accessibility. And could that be done with the more vibrant mixed use, not just a stadium type of plan? I think the answer is definitively yes. And it becomes kind of like Navy Yard is, where, sure, at first, most people just came down here to go to Nats games and then ultimately DC United games across the street when Audi Field opened. But now people come down here because there's great restaurants and there's things to do and there's bars and there's, fitness and there's like all, everything that you have in every other neighborhood in DC. And if you want the version of it that is only available from the particular business that operates a Navy Yard, the shopping, the whatever, you come to Navy Yard and you go to that spot. And could RFK be that? Absolutely. But the question that Mayor Bowser did not address, something I would like to bring up next, is at what cost and for whomst is all of this for? Because that is really, really, really important, and thus we'll touch on it next. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. First, a look at what's trending. I want to continue diving in to the pros and cons of the RFK site based on what Muriel Bowser said this morning on the Sports Junkies as the Commanders start in earnest with Josh Harris in place and obviously Mitchell Rales, who will play a major, major part in this, taking over the Commanders, and off they go. Continuing where we left off, who this is for is really important because we talk about this topic most often through the lens of the people who listen to this radio station. If you are a frequent listener, it's probably because you're a sports fan. It's probably because you're a Commanders fan. And that is who we talk to and in many ways represent the views of, right? Not necessarily you personally, but like we're talking to you and we are you in a lot of ways. Like we think of it through the lens of sports, and thus it's about the fan base and what the fan base wants. But if we take a step back, we realize that the fan base is only some percentage of the citizens of D.C. and Maryland and Virginia. And that is what the power players, whether it's Mayor Bowser, whether it's the city council, have to consider. Who is this for? Because there are inevitably neighbors in the RFK neighborhood that will be affected heavily by games being there and concerts and all the things that would happen if the stadium was built on that site, that they live right next door to each other. They get along great. One's a sports fan, one's not. One would be super excited because he's had to go or she's had to go or they've had to go with their family out to FedEx, and it sucks. And now they'll get to go to the game in their backyard. Shoot, they'll charge their friends for parking. They're going to make money off this. This is going to be awesome. Can't wait. While their neighbor, who's not a sports fan, comes over to barbecue every once a month. They're like, hell no, I don't want the traffic. I don't want the ruckus. I don't want people coming in. I like my nice little quiet neighborhood over here. That's why I purchased it. It's not in the center of the hubbub of DC. It's not fully in the suburb. It's still urban, but we don't want the craziness that you get if you live close to Gallery Place on the night where an event is happening. If you live kind of in that Mount Vernon triangle area, that's just not something that you want to be a part of, and it actually is seen as a deficit to you. So there's that balance. And then I think there's a more important point that Mayor Bowser, I think, unintentionally exposes when talking about what's happened at Gallery Place and what's happened in Navy Yard with Capital One Arena, and then decades later, Nationals Park. Here's Bowser talking about the impact on, quote unquote, the city.
We expect to have robust community engagement, and that will be decided on a local level. It has nothing to do with the federal legislation. My experience with all economic development projects, the good ones, require a lot of community engagement, push and pull to get fantastic projects, including Nats Park. People will remember, some people didn't want Nats Park. The votes at the council were 7-6 until the end. Yet we have a great stadium that has transformed that area and has poured revenues into city coffers because of how successful it has been. The advantage to RFK is there's been football there, and the transportation infrastructure is there, and it is a campus.
Anytime I hear the word coffers, that is automatically a bit of a red flag. And when you define success purely through that lens, that it's poured money into the city's coffers, we made money off of it, it's a business transaction. To me, this is Craig Hoffman, citizen of the earth, my personal opinion. I think you have failed as a public servant, because your job is only partially to look out for the finances and the business of the city. It's also to look out for the people. And this gets very, very complicated. And I want to be clear, like, Bowser did that, the thing I described as failure in that answer. I would guess if I were to have the chance to follow up with her in a way that the Junkies did not. They asked other good questions. It's not a criticism. They just went a different direction. That she would talk about this, and we certainly would love to have the mayor on the show to dive deeper into this topic. So Mayor Bowser, if you're listening, come on back here to the Team 980. But it gets complicated because if you are someone who lives in a different part of DC and you're going to go to the restaurants and go to the stadium and go enjoy that neighborhood, like, yeah, it is a net positive to you. But I think the most important people, when we look at this from a human perspective, the most important people when we talk about changing the fabric of a neighborhood are the ones that live there. And while there is currently no one living on the 190 acres of the RFK site, because it's a national park that hasn't been, obviously purposed for that at this time, or it's federal land that hasn't been granted to have the ability for people to live on it at this time, there are people that would be dramatically affected that are not the wealthy folks that might be affected on the other side of the stadium. And why I think that's important and why that's an important comparison to draw specifically to Nats Park is, yes, there are tons of folks who live in Navy Yard now. Every time I come into work, it feels like another apartment building has been finished. I remember when I could look out the window behind me and see a bunch of parking and a gigantic parking lot, and then we had a station parking lot that was over there out that window. If I look straight ahead through the control room of 106.7 The Fan, there used to be some parking there. Then there was that McDonald's on the corner and another lot next to it. And now literally every direction that I have pointed, I am surrounded on three sides by luxury apartment buildings. And the only reason it's not four is because Capitol Street is right there. But if they could squeeze an apartment building between the end of our building and Capitol Street, you damn well know that they would. And it would be another luxury apartment building. So you build it up. It is, quote unquote, successful for the city, but the people that were living here in Navy Yard don't get to actually reap the rewards from that. They get displaced. And this is where this gets complicated, and this is where this gets hairy. And I don't know what the solution is, because we should want to make things nicer and upgrade it, but we should also do it in a way, if we can, so that the people that have been living in a certain place that is their home get to enjoy it. Which brings us to this last bite that I want to play from Bowser from this morning on the Commanders moving to RFK and the larger repercussions it would have for the city. Because JP asked Mayor Bowser, so is this going to be a competition between DC, Maryland, Virginia? And she actually answered in a way that I think drives home a point Clinton Yates made earlier in the program. These jurisdictions, while fighting for ultimately the stadium that is the home of the football team, need to work together to make sure something that happened recently never happens again because of what this city, Washington, D.C. is.
We don't see it as a battle. We're going to put our best foot forward because at the end of the day, we want the team. But my responsibility will be that we have a great development at RFK that benefits DC residents. So that's going to happen one way or the other. But we want it to happen with our big cities, great cities. They celebrate sport and they have their teams. Mm-hmm. And so we feel really strongly about making sure that we're competing around the world. And it's not just about football. There's some missed opportunities that we've had over the last year, like the World Cup. We couldn't get it because we didn't have the right stadium. They didn't want to go out to FedEx Field. Could we have a stadium that could support a Super Bowl? Could we, thinking about basketball and the investments we need to have there, we need the NBA championship and all-star game. So we want to make sure that we're competing with world capitals. We're a world capital. We shouldn't be passed over for the World Cup.
We are. We're the capital of the United States of America. And the World Cup is coming in 2026, and we're not having a game here. That's a problem. That is a huge issue that would literally never happen in any other country. If the World Cup went to England, they'd have 5 different stadiums in London hosting games. If it went to France, it would have multiple stadiums probably in Paris. And we can't get one game in DC, which, by the way, is one of the biggest soccer cities in America. We haven't, obviously there's a Super Bowl that should come if you build a new NFL stadium. I know she said NBA championship. That's going to involve the Wizards being better, but what she likely meant was the NCAA tournament. Haven't hosted that despite all of the college athletics around here and the passion for it, all the different alumni bases. This would be a great place for a Final Four. So many different big schools have gigantic alumni support here. Not on the radar. Why? We don't have the facilities. And so the opportunity is large. And part of the reason that you want to live in a place like DC is because those types of things are available to you. And there's got to be a balance of folks that have been here generationally, that have been displaced by all the different moving and shaking in this city as it has continued to grow and develop, just like at other cities that is not unique to DC. But when it comes to this football team, which is something that brings the city together, I still think that there is a way to do it at RFK that is respectful of that, is multi-use, does get the stadium back where it is best for a whole litany of reasons. And it's going to be up to the Harris Group to see how patient they want to be to fight the bureaucratic federal red tape that is currently on that site, to win over the hearts and minds of the city council members who don't want it and come up with a plan that satisfies them, and ultimately to pony up when it comes to the finances, because we know Maryland wants to keep it in Maryland and Virginia would love to have the team not just headquartered there, but play its games there as well. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. If you want the full interview from the Sports Junkies with Mayor Muriel Bowser, check it out in their podcast feed or by rewinding this morning in the free Odyssey app.
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.